Hi there, I'm Becky Hammond and welcome back to Isogo TV. I am here to help you apply your greatest strengths to your everyday work and your everyday life. Today I get to answer a question. It's a question that you have had as a viewer and also my clients have had as well. It's one that comes up quite often, especially from the skeptics of the StrengthsFinder strengths perspective. So today on episode 32 for this Q&A day, you asked this question: isn't StrengthsFinder just an excuse to suck? The employee of one of the managers that I work with asked this question after a StrengthsFinder experience and some other interactions about strengths. He was frustrated. He said, isn't StrengthsFinder just an excuse to suck? And while that comment might have seemed very snarky, it actually is very common. It's a common question that I get, that isn't this idea behind identifying your strengths and saying you need to work in your strengths, this is how you're going to be best, isn't that just an excuse to not do things because they're not your strengths? And really, there's been fiery conversations about that. Over at the Harvard Business Review, there was an article that was written back in January that had some conversations spinning around it because it was entitled "Strengths Coaching Can Actually Weaken You." And his premise was that when you focus exclusively on strengths, it can be a problem. And while there were some things that were off with some of his thought processes, or at least I would disagree with some of his thought processes, I agree that yes, you can't focus exclusively on people's strengths. That when you ignore weaknesses, it can be a problem. But rather that your strengths can be used to mitigate those weaknesses, that you can go about getting to the result in a way that is the way you're wired. You know, going back to the core of this is about your talents, your patterns of thought, feeling, and behavior that are so natural to you, there's no changing them. You can't wish them up in the ranking. You know, like in episode 21 when we talked about strengths envy, there's nothing that you can do to get these things to come to the top if they're at your bottom of your list, if they're not one of your strengths already, they're not one of your talents that you were born with. Oftentimes your strengths aren't necessarily going to tell you what you do, but rather how you do it. You know, there's going to be some things that feel like more of a fit with your strengths and other things that might not. But in the end, if you are in a role where you got to get something done or you got to think strategically about something, you're going to use the tools that you already have, the things that you're already wired with to get to the outcome that's desired, that you're required, the goal that you're going for. You know, for example, I think a really good one to use is achiever. An example is to use as achiever because there are so many achievers out there. I'm one of them. There are 30% of us we're at 13, almost 0.5 million people who've taken this assessment, and there's still 30% of the world comes up as an achiever, somewhere in their top 5. And the whole premise behind an achiever is that there's kind of an internal drive to put check boxes and put check marks in those check boxes. By the end of the day, there's a completion that needs to happen. And so I think it's a fallacy of a lot of people who have this achiever strength, that if you don't have this strength, then you're not going to be capable of getting things done, that you're going to fall in this category of a slacker. And actually just today, my husband and I David, were talking about what does that mean to get things done when you don't have an achiever, or what do you do? I mean, in his case, that is very much his position. You know, he doesn't have the achiever strength, but he absolutely gets things done and gets them done well every single day. So for him, we were talking through, maybe it's the relator, the belief, the arranger that gives him the stamina that he needs to really push through and get the job done. You know, it's not like he's going into work at 9 and coming home at 3 every day. You know, he gets up at 5, leaves before 6, and is sometimes not home until 7. There's a lot of stamina that's required, but it doesn't have to do with this kind of innate drive and stamina and energy that comes from just kind of getting things done. Rather, it has to do with the relationships that he's engaging in, the emails that need to be responded to. Who are the people on the other side of those emails? You know, for me as an achiever, when I'm checking those things off, it's because, I got to say I responded to that. There's a little arrow that is outward on it. For him, it's about who's on the other side of that arrow. Or oftentimes it's about, okay, how can I arrange my schedule, using that arranger, maximally to spend the most time with my family, uninterrupted. And that's the belief that oftentimes people with belief have a real family orientation. And so for him, that's a driving factor to keep him at work longer, to get things done so that over the weekend, he can just be fully present with his family and be able to enjoy that time together. And so the answer to the question is no, it's not an excuse to suck. It really isn't. There's a responsibility that we're called to in the different roles that we have to do well, to achieve what we're set out to achieve. It's just that we're all gonna do it in a way that makes sense to the way that we're naturally wired. That it's not an excuse not to do something because it's not your strength, but rather a tool to do something in a way that is your strength. So that was your Q and my A, and I'm curious for all you skeptics out there if I answered your question or if you have other perspectives from your experience that make you think differently. I'd love to know and have a conversation about it. So the best way to contact me right now is over at Facebook, the Isogo Strong Facebook page. So find me over there and leave a comment and I'll get right back to you. You know, I want this message of strengths and the power of it to get out to the world. So if you're watching this and would share it, I would love that, to help get that message out to everybody. And thank you for joining me here today, and looking forward to having you come along next week as well on Isogo TV.